The Missing Medic, Kathleen Durst, 1982. Please subscribe my channel and like it. One of New York's wealthiest families, Robert Durst appeared to have everything. He was the eldest son of real estate tycoon Seymour Durst, who owned skyscrapers and residential buildings in Manhattan. Robert grew up in the wealthy community of Scarsdale with his brothers Douglas and Thomas and sister Wendy. He graduated from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in 1965 with an economics degree, but he faced tragedy during his childhood when his mother Bernice, then 32 years old, committed suicide in 1950. He was only 7 years old when she jumped from the roof of the family home. After university, Robert enrolled in a doctoral program at the University of California at Los Angeles. There, he met Susan Berman, the daughter of a Las Vegas mobster. He dropped out in 1969 without completing his degree, returned to New York, and began to work for his father. Kathleen McCormack was an attractive blonde dental hygienist who had left her Long Island home at the age of 19. She moved into an apartment in Manhattan that was owned by the Durst Organization real estate firm. That is how she met Robert Durst. Although he was 9 years older, they quickly fell in love. The couple moved in together in January 1972 and relocated to Vermont, where they opened a health food store called All Good Things. Seymour convinced his son to return to New York to work for the family real estate company. Kathleen and Robert Durst married in 1973, within 2 years of having first met. While he worked for his family's business along with his younger brother Douglas, Kathy, as she was known to family and friends, attended nursing school at Western Connecticut State College. She graduated in 1978 and enrolled in medical school. She wanted to become a pediatrician and open a clinic for children. He refused to pay his wife's tuition, so Kathy had to pay for her schooling. He drove a Volkswagen Beetle while she drove an old Mercedes. They lived in a penthouse in a cooperative apartment building on Riverside Drive near 76th Street. The marriage also grew increasingly stormy. By 1981, Kathleen was complaining to friends that her husband was violent and had physically assaulted her. Her brother James watched his impatient brother-in-law grab Kathleen by the hair at her mother's house because he wanted to leave. On another occasion, he assaulted photographer Peter Schwartz because he did not depart quickly enough when Robert ordered everyone out of the apartment. In March 1981, Kathy told her friend Gilbert Najami that she planned to divorce Robert when she graduated from medical school. She rented an apartment on East 86th Street as a sanctuary from the marital strife. Meanwhile, Robert was seeing other women, including Mia Farrow's sister Prudence and his friend Susan Berman. On January 6, 1982, Kathleen went to the Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx to be treated for bruises to her face. Robert denied assaulting her. He claimed that she was making up stories to increase the amount of a divorce settlement that she was likely to receive. His 29-year-old wife was in her 4th year at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. She was 4 months away from graduating and had hired a divorce lawyer. She was afraid that Robert would kill her, and she told friends to look to her husband if anything happened to her. She clearly did not trust him. On January 31, 1982, Kathleen phoned Najami, her closest friend whom she had met in nursing school. Tensions were running high and she needed to take refuge from her husband and get away from their cottage in Westchester County. Najami invited her over for dinner at her home in Newtown, Connecticut, but Kathleen left at 7:15 p.m. after her husband phoned at 7 p.m. and demanded that she return home. Before she headed out the door to make the 45-minute drive back to her lakeside cottage in South Salem, New York, the two women agreed to meet for dinner in New York City the following evening. "Gilbert, if something happens to me tonight, promise that you'll check it out. I'm afraid of Bobby," she told Najami. A week earlier, Kathleen Durst had dinner with cottage neighbor William Meyer and his wife. "If anything happens to me, suspect foul play in Bob," she told them. Robert later told police that he and his wife drank a bottle of wine when she returned to their stone cottage overlooking Lake Truesdale. After more arguing, she announced that she was returning to their apartment in New York City. He dropped her off at the Katona train station in South Salem to catch the 9:17 p.m. train to Manhattan. He said that he phoned her at about 11:30 p.m. to make sure that she had arrived safely home. When an investigator pointed out that telephone records could be used to confirm the information, Durst said that he had called from a payphone near their cottage while he was out walking his dog. However, the nearest phone was 3 miles away, and there was a snowstorm that night. He told her family that he had phoned from a South Salem restaurant. He told officers that he stopped in for a drink with neighbors that night, but the neighbors did not recall his visit. The next morning, a woman who claimed that she was Kathleen Durst called the School of Medicine and told Dean Albert Cooperman that she was too ill to attend class. The building superintendent at the Riverside Drive apartment where she lived with her husband initially said that he had seen Kathleen there on February 1. He later admitted that he only saw the woman from behind, so he could not be certain that it was Mrs. Durst. That evening, Najmi began to worry when Kathleen had not turned up to meet her at the Lions Gate in downtown New York City. Unable to find her friend, Najmi phoned police repeatedly for the next few days to alert them and ask for help. Durst did not report his wife missing until 4 days later, on February 5, 1982, when he arrived at a police station on Manhattan's West Side with his dog in tow. He told Detective Mike Struck that he had not initially realized that his wife was missing because she sometimes slept at school in the final months leading up to her graduation. He only became aware of her disappearance after a dean at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine phoned to tell him that Kathleen had not turned up for classes all week. By then, Robert had sublet Kathleen's apartment on East 86th Street and disposed of some of her clothing and books. Given that Kathleen Durst appeared to have been seen in Manhattan, police believed that she had arrived home from the Durst cottage and disappeared while she was in New York City. Investigators did not conduct a thorough search of the couple's house in South Salem. Najmi was not convinced that her friend had made it home to the city that Sunday night. A week after she last saw Kathy Durst, she boarded the 9:17 p.m. train from South Salem to Manhattan. It was only several cars long. After speaking with some of the passengers who had taken the trip the week before, she learned that none had seen her friend aboard a week earlier. Najmi returned to South Salem and broke into the cottage. She found Kathleen's unopened mail in the garbage and also discovered inside Kathleen's closet the brown suede boots and a cable-knit sweater that Robert claimed his wife had been wearing when he dropped her off at the train station. Durst placed an advertisement in the newspaper announcing that he was offering a $100,000 reward for information that would lead to the discovery of his missing wife. Within a few weeks, however, the police spoke to the 3 people who said that they had seen or heard from Kathy Durst after she is said to have returned to Manhattan. The investigation ground to a halt. Detectives believe that she may have vanished deliberately in an attempt to flee a failing marriage. Circumstantial evidence suggested that Robert Durst had played a role in her disappearance, but police had no body and no physical evidence. In the ensuing media coverage after Kathleen's disappearance, Robert's friend Susan Berman acted as his spokesman. Family and friends were convinced that Robert Durst knew more about his wife's disappearance than he was telling, however. They cited the conflicting stories that he told about what he did the night she went missing. Her sister, Mary Hughes, also found jewelry that Durst claimed Kathleen had been wearing when she went missing. In 1983, her mother filed a claim in surrogate court requesting that she be appointed the temporary administrator of her daughter's estate. Before Kathy disappeared, she had given 2 friends confidential financial information for safekeeping. Within a year, one file was taken from Kathy Traceman's dresser drawer and the other was stolen from Najmi's home in Newtown, Connecticut, along with 2 boxes of items relating to Durst's disappearance. The burglaries have never been solved. In March 1990, Robert Durst quietly filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment after notices were published in the Westchester Law Journal. The petition was granted 3 months later. He moved into a luxurious apartment on Fifth Avenue with successful real estate broker Deborah Lee Sheraton. Durst moved out 9 months later. He didn't like the upper crust neighborhood. He married Sheraton on December 11, 2000, in a 15-minute private ceremony in a conference room that overlooked Times Square. The wedding came less than 2 months after the New York State Police had reopened the investigation into Kathleen Durst's disappearance and wanted to question him about some discrepancies in his story. State Police investigator Joseph C. Bixera had decided to take another look at the case after an informant claimed to have relevant information. The Connecticut man had been arrested in Westchester County after exposing himself repeatedly. Although the tip that he provided did not prove to be useful, investigators were sufficiently intrigued by the case to reopen the investigation. Witnesses who in 1982 said that they had seen Kathleen in Manhattan were re-interviewed. They admitted that they could not be certain the woman they saw was, indeed, Kathleen. In 2000, investigators concluded that Durst had disappeared from South Salem, and not from Manhattan as the earlier investigation had believed. Durst sold the 1,200-square-foot cottage in South Salem in 1990. A decade later, investigators searched the property and sent police divers into Lake Truesdale to look for clues using a metal detector. They also removed part of a bedroom wall in the cottage and used police dogs to search the house after a former housekeeper said that she had seen a stain around the time that Kathleen disappeared. Police also wanted to interview Durst's friend Susan Berman, who was living in Manhattan at the time of the disappearance and had acted as Robert's unofficial spokesman. By the time the investigation was reopened, Durst had moved away from New York. He had left the family business abruptly in 1994 when he learned that his younger brother Douglas would become head of the family's real estate empire. When Seymour Durst died in 1995, the Durst organization was worth $650 million. Meanwhile, Robert Durst drifted around the country, traveling between California, Connecticut, Texas, and Manhattan. 2 weeks after Durst's wedding to Sheraton, his friend Susan Berman, 55, was found dead just as investigators were planning to interview her about Kathleen Durst's disappearance. She had been shot in the head in her California home in Benedict Canyon with a 9mm handgun just a few days before Christmas 2000. The journalist, author, and screenwriter had been killed gangland style. Berman was the daughter of Las Vegas mobster Dave Berman, an associate of gangsters Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky. Her books Lady Las Vegas and Easy Street recount her experiences growing up amid the glitter of casinos. Berman's neighbors called the police when they noticed that her dogs were running loose. Police found her body on the floor of her home. It was initially believed that her family's connections with organized crime had led to her murder, but that theory was ruled out. There were no signs of forced entry, robbery, or a struggle, and no witnesses stepped forward. Berman had apparently told friends that Robert confessed to her that he had killed his wife. That led to speculation that Berman was killed because she knew too much about Kathleen's disappearance. Ballistics tests on a 9mm handgun later found in the trunk of Durst's car proved to be inconclusive as to whether they matched the casings found in Berman's home. Her murder remains unsolved. Just 2 months earlier, on September 30, 2001, a 13-year-old boy had been out fishing off Galveston Bay in Texas at dusk with his father. Suddenly, something in the water washing up against the rocks caught his attention. It was the dead torso of a man. He had been badly beaten, and his arms, legs, and head had been cut off. The head would never be recovered, but police divers did find a plastic bag containing the arms and legs. Inside one of the bags was a newspaper that had the address of a 4-unit apartment building at 2213 Avenue K and a hardware store receipt for a saw. Police searched the garbage in the building's alley and found a .22 caliber handgun that Durst had bought at a local sporting goods store on August 30. These clues helped police identify him and his victim. Morris Black was a cantankerous 71-year-old man who lived in an apartment across the hall from Durst. Neighbors said that the two men argued frequently. Police found blood on the walls and floors of the two men's apartments, and a trail in the hallway between them. They discovered a paring knife and bloody boots inside Durst's apartment. A neighbor saw him load some garbage bags into his car the day that Black's body was found. Police arrested Durst more than a week later, on October 9, 2001, and charged him with Black's murder. A search of his Honda turned up a saw and a 9mm handgun, the same caliber that was used in Susan Berman's murder. They also found a dry cleaning receipt for a store in New Orleans, where Durst dropped off a blanket around the time of the murder. Although the comforter had already been cleaned, police retrieved it to test it for traces of blood. Investigators learned that Durst had rented his apartment on Avenue K in Galveston in April after spotting it advertised in a newspaper. It was located in a fourplex and was sparsely furnished with a bed, a table, a television set, and a stove, but no telephone. He claimed to landlord Klaus Dillman that he was renting the place for his mute sister-in-law Dorothy Jenner. Police later discovered that he had borrowed the name of a high school classmate whom he had not seen since they had graduated from Scarsdale High School. Jenner had never been to Texas, she was not mute, or his sister-in-law. In fact, Durst would dress up as a woman and don a wig to masquerade as Jenner. Durst also posed as a fictitious woman called Dorothy Winnie when he rented an apartment in New Orleans, and he used the name Jim Terse at a Holiday Inn Express in Galveston just before he was arrested. Besides the $300 a month unit, he had a luxury one in Dallas that he rented for more than $3,000 a month. He wrote on a rental application that he had worked as a botanist for the Pacific Lumber Company in Eureka, California, and listed his income as being $480,000 a year in salary and investments. He said that New York writer Julie Baumgold was his daughter. None of the information was true. On October 10, Sheraton sent Durst the $300,000 bond that he needed to be released from jail in Galveston. Officials there were not aware that they were holding a member of one of New York's richest families. When Los Angeles police investigators and Westchester County District Attorney Janine Pirro learned of Durst's arrest, they flew to Galveston to meet with local investigators and question Durst about Berman's murder and Kathleen Durst's disappearance. He was to appear in court on October 16, but he failed to show up. A grand jury indicted him on charges of bail jumping and murder. With assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the police department in Galveston launched a nationwide manhunt. Police began looking for Durst in New Orleans, where he had rented an apartment and was believed to have fled just after the Black murder. Investigators searched the unit after he abandoned it in October. They found a videotape of a television program about Kathleen Durst that had aired in July and a silver medallion that had once belonged to Susan Berman. Durst used Morris Black's South Carolina's driver's license and Medicare card for identification to rent a 1996 red Chevrolet Corsica from Rent-A-Wreck in Mobile, Alabama, on October 17. As he drove through Maryland, he stopped long enough to steal the license plates from another vehicle. Then he headed to Hanover Township, Pennsylvania, where he had attended Lehigh University in Bethlehem. He checked into the Staybridge Suites on November 18 under the name of Emilio Vignani. He checked out on November 30, 2001. While he was on the lam, officials froze a New Jersey bank account in which Durst held $1.8 million and from which his second wife attempted to withdraw money. Durst was captured several hours later, after being on the lam for about 7 weeks. It was the day before a segment about Kathleen Durst's disappearance was to air on the television program America's Most Wanted. He was caught at a Wegmans store in Hanover Township after trying to shoplift a sandwich and bandages at lunchtime, while he had $500 on him. He had shaved his head and eyebrows while he tried to evade authorities. When he was arrested, he was wearing dark pants, black sneakers, and a black windbreaker. He was driving a rented red Chevrolet Corsica. He identified himself to the Colonial Regional Police Department as Robert Durst and said that he was in town to visit his daughter, who was attending university. In fact, Durst has no children. Police quickly realized that the shoplifter they had just picked up was wanted for murder in Galveston. He was held at the Northampton County Prison until he could be extradited to Texas to face charges. Detectives opened the trunk of his rented red Corsica on December 5, 2001, in the presence of investigators from Galveston and Westchester County. Inside was some marijuana, 2.38 caliber handguns, $37,000 in cash, and Black's driver's license. Durst was returned to Galveston aboard a commercial flight in January 2002. He pleaded guilty 2 months later to killing Black. He claimed that the older man died accidentally when Durst was defending himself, and he further alleged that Black broke into his apartment and was shot by accident when the two men were fighting over a pistol. He also said that he went to Galveston in November 2000 to escape the heavy media coverage that surrounded the reopened investigation into the disappearance of his first wife. On the other hand, prosecutors contended that Durst had deliberately killed Black to assume his identity. After a 6-week trial and 5 days of deliberations, Durst was acquitted in November 2003 of murdering Black. He subsequently pleaded guilty to 2 counts of jumping bail and 1 count of tampering with evidence for having dismembered Black's body. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but received credit for time already served. He was released 2 weeks later. He was imprisoned again in October 2004 on gun charges stemming from the weapons that police found when they searched his red Corsica. He was paroled 9 months later, in July 2005. The mystery surrounding the disappearance and fate of Kathleen Durst remains. But the story inspired books as well as episodes of such television series as Law & Order, America's Most Wanted, and Prime Time. In 2008, a movie was shot whose story was loosely based on Robert Durst. All Good Things starred Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Dunst.